So welcome to today's session of strategies and resources for students with complex support needs in distance learning environments. As I mentioned, my name is Michael Storr and I work for the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, or NTACT, and today's webinar is being co-sponsored with WinTAC and NTAC. And again, welcome. You can find, as we had mentioned, the PowerPoint for today on the NTAC website under Events. So if our presenters, if you could go ahead and click on your videos so we can see everybody, we'd appreciate that. And I'll do a quick introduction of our presenters today. We have Makenzie Allison from Able, South Carolina, Leslie Corey from the Watson Institute, Allison DeYoung, who works for the Youth Employment Solutions Center, Samhita Ilango from Got Transition and the National Alliance to Advance Adolescent Health, and Linda O'Neill from San Diego State University. Our outline for today, I'm going to do a quick overview of individuals with complex support needs. Following that, Makenzie Allison is going to do a presentation on supported decision making. Following that, Linda O'Neill is going to discuss supporting families during this crisis that we're in with COVID-19. After that, Leslie Corey is going to provide some strategies and reflections from the field from someone that's working directly with students and families in a local school system. Following that presentation, we will have a discussion on employment preparation by Allison DeYoung, and then information regarding health and secondary transition considerations from Samhita Ilango. And then we'll wrap up with some additional resources and supports for your reference. So I'm going to provide a brief overview. And again, just as a reminder, you can find the PowerPoint and all of the resources on the Transition TA website. And then if you do have any questions regarding content or resource suggestions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A feature. Or if you are having any technical difficulties, use the chat feature. So when you think about your students, as we look at this slide, you've worked with them if you're a professional, whether you're an educator or a VR professional. You've worked with these students for months up until March in a real brick and mortar situation. And I think it's important as we look at, now that we're in a virtual learning environment, to think about what was and what is in that student's current plans, be that an IEP, an IPE, or a supports plan. And if you're talking about the individual education program or the IEP, what was written in those present education levels? What was in the transition plan? What was that student's post-secondary goals and measurable annual goals? What is listed there? And then I think that the step back is how can, now that the student is working remotely, working at home, how can we ensure that those measurable goals and secondary transitions are able to continue? And during today's webinar, we are going to provide a number of resources and suggestions to help in making sure that we're able to maintain those needs and support the strengths of the students that we're working with. So when we think about what you already know about your students, and while the times we are in are extremely difficult, and I think back at the beginning of March, nobody envisioned that in most places in the United States, schools are not going to be reopened until the end of the school year. We're going to continue to work in this virtual environment into the summer. And it really is, it's time to take a breath, to stop and think about, what is it that we are doing? What services and information are we providing to our students, be it remotely or to families, to help support those students? And take a step back, and is what we are providing, especially for students with complex support needs, is it age and ability appropriate? And I mention that because some folks have shared some resources with me over the last couple of weeks, and when I looked at them, they were nice resources for somebody in 2nd or 3rd grade. They weren't necessarily age appropriate for someone in 11th or 12th grade. So kind of taking a step back and making sure that the materials we're using are both age appropriate but also ability appropriate for the students. And is it reasonable for that student to work on? And are we providing the directions needed for the families, if they're supporting, or if there are other caregivers that are supporting that student at home, for that student to work on and complete successfully? And then to take a step back and think about yourself and the time that you have and the environment that that student is in. Are we doing and making the best choices? The other thing too to think about is, what are the requirements of your, either your school or your agency in supporting those students? And are we making sure that we're taking that into account as we look at resources and materials? It's also important to make sure that we are encouraging and we are engaging the youth as much as possible in the decisions that are being made, both for their different types of learning activities and services, but also their choices. And I think providing those suggestions to the families and the caregivers that are working with that young person. It's also important to remember to keep track of what we're doing and to document that to make sure that we're keeping account of what we're working on. It's also important to maintain a schedule for learning. We have talked in other presentations about maintaining this idea of a meaningful day for a student. So what would that look like? And what would that week look like? And even, suggestions for what that weekend could look like. And I know for all of us, it seems like each day is kind of running into each other. So I think having that schedule and really outlining what that day could look like is so important. It's also important, if possible, to coordinate with our school partners, be they teachers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language therapists, counselors, as well as our agency partners from vocational rehabilitation or the intellectual disability or mental health communities. The other thing I wanted to mention is that it's really important to keep ongoing communication with families and caregivers. And while you probably all have been doing this already, and you've already started working with families, we have a really nice resource that someone provided for us, and it is one of your handouts, and I'll try to bring it over. And what's nice about this resource, it is tips for families for supporting their children at home, but it really does give some practical tips. The other thing that's nice about this resource is when you go to the bottom, there's actually a glossary of some common used terms as we're working with students in remote learning environments. So again, that's one of your handouts. It was provided through the Florida Inclusion Network, and I think it would be, it's a nice resource for folks to utilize. We mentioned this actually on our March 24th webinar, but I think it was important to bring it up again as we're looking at planning and looking at daily schedules to outline. So looking at whatever the measurable annual goals are that a student has, to kind of take those areas into consideration and how could we have those adjusted and worked on in a virtual or a home environment. Also looking at the student's post-secondary goals, and then as we were talking about, kind of figuring out what that day, that week would look like for that student and what type of activities they could engage, and then what supports are needed. And I think helping a family with this could be really beneficial. And looking at some type of very basic home learning schedule, like the example from teachers, paid teachers, on what a schedule could possibly look like for a student with complex support needs. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Makenzie, Allison, who works at Able, South Carolina, and she's going to talk a bit about supported decision making.
Hey everyone. Thanks, Michael, for the introduction. And like he said, I'm going to talk a little bit about supported decision making. For some of you, that might be something you're familiar with, and for others of you, this may be a new concept. So supported decision-making is simply exactly what it sounds like. It's gathering support for making decisions. And the truth is that this is something that we're doing every single day. So seeking advice or doing your research before you buy a vehicle, having an attorney at the closing of your home, maybe reaching out to a friend for relationship advice. Those are all examples of supported decision-making. So it really is something that we're doing on a daily basis. And there's a couple of questions that I always consider when thinking about supported decision-making, guardianship, this whole concept, especially when it comes to youth with complex support needs. And those questions are, should a permanent decision be made about a person's decision-making capacity at age 18? And then the second question is, what would my life look like if a permanent decision was made about my decision-making capacity at age 18? The truth is, I made a lot of mistakes at 18, and I made a lot of mistakes at 20 and at 25, and heck, I made mistakes this week. So the fact that we look at youth with complex support needs and think that we need to rush to guardianship to protect them, it's a little unfair to judge decision-making capacity at age 18 when all of us are continuously developing and increasing that decision-making capacity. So for people with disabilities, there's often an assumption that guardianship is the best option. And the truth is, there's a lot of other less restrictive options that I encourage people to explore first. Keep in mind, guardianship is always there. It's always an option. It's always something you can return to. But exploring some less restrictive options first, I always encourage folks to do first and foremost. So how does this all fit into what's going on now with COVID-19? The biggest thing that families and individuals have right now is time. Time to sit down and have these conversations. Time to think about some of those areas of concern. We see a lot of times, an individual is 2 months from 18 and none of these conversations have happened. And there's this rush. And it's a lot better if you can start these conversations earlier, address those areas of concern. And so right now, what better time to have these conversations when we have all of this extra time at home? So some things to consider when beginning these conversations, like I said, is those areas of concern. That might be around financial decision making. If an individual receives benefits, what does that process look like? Does the individual understand how that process works? Medical decision making, speaking to healthcare professionals and being able to discuss issues they may be having or things that they need. Speaking up at IEP meetings, are they providing input? Are they comfortable in those situations? Being able to recognize abuse and speak up on that if it's needed. So those are all some things that I recommend considering. Another big part of it is exploring your options and educating yourself. The biggest thing here is just being well-versed on all of the options that all are out there. So all the different alternatives to guardianship. So whether that's power of attorney, rep payee, being familiar with transfer of rights at age 18 within schools and what that looks like. Having a thorough understanding of the full breadth of guardianship is that if that is in place and how rights restrictive that is. That varies by state, but there's a lot of things that go away when guardianship is in place. Not being able to sign employment paperwork, not being able to vote, lots of different things. So just having a thorough understanding of just the full breadth of that before getting into it. And this is a great resource, supporteddecisionmaking.org. If you're curious about what laws are in your state surrounding supported decision-making or guardianship, that's something that you can explore. And supported decision-making agreements can be formal or informal. So there's templates that you can look up online, and it can be a formal thing where everyone signs, or it can be informal and just be something as simple as a verbal agreement. And that supported decision-making network, that's part of this whole decision-making process. That can include whoever the individual wants. So if it's someone who's just really tight with family and they just want mom and dad and sister and brother involved in that network, then that's fine. But if you have someone who's really a social butterfly and really connected in the community, there might be some community members that would make sense to be a part of that supported decision-making network, people that the individual really trusts to help them make decisions. You may also want to include experts on areas that maybe mom and dad aren't as familiar with. So that's an option as well. And the biggest thing is just everyone who's a part of the supported decision-making network should agree on the plan and know their role. Most importantly, the plan should be centered on the needs and wants of the individual, and always keep this at the forefront of all conversations. If you want to go back, Michael, sorry. So what types of things need to be considered? These are just some examples of some critical decision-making areas. And this, your decision-making agreement can include all of these things, or it can include a couple, or it can include other things. So these are just some examples. Finances, and this can include things like paying bills, making small purchases, managing a bank account. Relationships, so things like understanding personal space, being able to recognize abuse and speak up if that were to occur. Education, understanding accommodations, being able to provide input in the IEP meetings. Employment, do they understand how to apply and interview for a job? Are they able to communicate what they want to do or not do for work? Health, do they know what medications they take and when to take them? Are they doing that? Being able to communicate with healthcare professionals. And then home and community, emergency plans, transportation, cooking and cleaning, independent living skills, those types of things. So those are some examples of areas to consider for supported decision making. But again, that can be, you can include all of that, you can include just some of those things, or there may be things specific to your family that need to be added to that as well. So on the next slide, I'm going to show an example of a supported decision making tool. And this is just, like I said, an example of one, and this is a screenshot of one of the pages. And this was made as part of the South Carolina Supported Decision-Making Project. And so it breaks down all those different critical decision-making areas and some different things. And the cool thing about this tool is it really gets away from that deficits-driven discussion, and it focuses more on opportunities for skill building. So it's not Johnny can't do this and Johnny can't do that. It's, well, Johnny's never really had an opportunity to practice this skill, so we don't really know. And it's very user-friendly, and this can be edited to be accessible for whatever the disability may be. So you go through here and select, green is having the opportunity to learn and practice the skill a lot. Yellow is for those areas where there's been some opportunities to learn and practice, and red is there hasn't been opportunities to learn and practice. So as you can see, obviously, working through this, there might be some areas where an individual's checking all green. They've had lots of time to practice this at home, at school, and there might be some other areas where the individual and the family is going through it and they're thinking, man, we have not been working on this, or we thought they were doing this in school and that's actually not happening. So it's a great way to make sure, one, that there's agreement between what the school is seeing and what families are seeing. But it's also a great tool to kind of figure out what areas are needing more skill development. And then on the next slide is just kind of a follow-up from that tool. So that's part one of the tool, really user-friendly. Part two is just kind of some discussion questions. Looking at these results, what are areas of concern? What things are going well? What things do we really need to pay attention to, and helping you kind of develop a plan. And then the third part of the tool is an appendix, and it includes activities to promote independence. So like I said, if Johnny's really rocking and rolling with relationships and home and community, but finances, there just hasn't been time to practice those skills. Maybe some mock budgeting exercises, and these are things that can be done at home right now. Counselors can be, calling and meeting with consumers, maybe doing some of this over the phone. So some examples for activities to promote independence. Mock budgeting exercises, role-playing relationship scenarios, creating an emergency plan. Now's a great time to do that. And if maybe an individual isn't taking medication independently now, explore apps and maybe download one, and now's a good time to practice that where mom and dad are home, and be able to get more familiar with that. Keep in mind, independence is rarely all or nothing. We often learn skills by facing the natural consequences of not knowing how to do them. I'm sure we all can attest to some of our biggest failures being some of our biggest learning lessons too, and I know that for myself to be true. And keeping in mind that people with disabilities have the right to make mistakes, and just like all of us learn from making mistakes and grow from those experiences, people with disabilities and complex support needs have the right to do the same thing. Address those areas of concern and connect with sources of support. So mom and dad are not expected to be the expert on all of these areas. If there are things that an individual has not had an opportunity to practice, Mom and dad don't have to provide all of that. Reach out to the resources, connect with service providers, get connected with the VR, employment services, whatever resources are in your community, connect with those resources. Reach out to teachers. They're a great source of information and oftentimes know a lot about community resources that parents maybe not as well versed in. And the earlier these conversations begin, the better. Obviously, we don't want to be having these conversations when an individual is, a couple months away from 18 and rushing to get all this done and realizing we haven't had opportunities to do any of this stuff. The earlier these happen, the longer you have to increase those opportunities for skill building, and it allows more time for skill development so that when that age of transition does come, families are prepared, the individual's prepared, and everyone's on the same page. So IDEA mandates transition planning no later than age 16 in the IEP. So those skill areas needing development can translate directly into goals in the IEP. So even if this is something that families are just having this discussion, they can bring these concerns to the IEP and say, these are things that we think skills that need to be developed, and the individual can, discuss that as well. And those are things that can translate directly into goals. And just keep in mind, with a strong IEP and a home life that promotes independence, incredible things are possible. So that is a little about supported decision making and some things that can be done right now with all this extra time that we have to take advantage of that. So there you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Makenzie. Appreciate it. And there were a lot of really positive comments for this section, so thank you so much. We're next going to move into talking a little bit more about how to support families during the COVID-19 crisis that we're in. And we're going to talk a little bit too about benefits and looking at financial issues for students with complex support needs. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Linda O'Neill, who works at San Diego State University and their InterWork Institute, and is also the Regional Center of Orange County. And it's also connected to NTACT. So with that, and she has many hats that she wears, I'm going to turn this over to Linda.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much. Happy to be a part of this. And good morning to everyone. Not quite everyone. I know some of you are in the PM afternoon now, so good morning and good afternoon. I want to talk about some of the things that the California team has learned over the past 6 years and into our 7th. We were a part of the 6 model demonstration projects called Promise, and we worked with students who had some very complex needs who were supplemental security income recipients. It was a great project that was supported by the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Social Security Administration, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the U.S. Department of Labor. So a lot of support for the project, and we've actually learned a lot. Our team at San Diego State University is now in the process of doing the final research elements associated with our programming. And just so you know, we had over 180 high schools throughout California that were involved in this project. And we learned a lot that I think is definitely helping us through this pandemic. Working with families was one of the components of our project that was most important, and we weren't sure what we were going to find, but we found so many great things about the importance of including families in programming, any kind of programming, whether it's education or social services for our youth. Anyways, the things that we're finding now, we've got some best case scenarios and worst case scenarios. Socioeconomic limitations seem to be a key to making sure our families have what they need to support their children, youth, and young adults at home. We're finding that many of them had no or limited access to technology or internet, and there's some issues in the home with many people trying to get on technology equipment and not having the bandwidth needed to support all these different tools. Some of the families had 3 children, 4 children, 2 parents trying to work from home. So a lot of things that have to be looked at, I think family by family. Each individual family has their own needs, their own resources, the things that they can do, the things that they can't do, and the things that they really want help with. And I I think the other thing that we're finding is there's translation needs out there that we needed to make sure that we are working with, and we continue to need to do that. A lot of financial worries out there, access to food, and that was one thing we found in California Promise, was that there are a lot of families out there who, even though they might get food stamps or what we call CalFresh, there was still not enough food for everyone in the family to eat. And making sure that our families know how to get food in this day and age is really important. And then also we saw caring for other relatives. Next slide. Okay, so key here is ongoing communication with families. Phone, for a lot of people that don't have internet access, was really one of the essential ways to get a hold of them. Either calling or texting them. We're finding texting is really, really something people like to do. And so we send information that way. Email, when there is an option of using a computer or a phone with email access. And then also mailers, newsletters, flyers, notes, postcards, anything to keep that communication going. And what we found in Promise was that families started to trust us as we worked to make sure that they were given the kind of resources and supports they needed. So what we're continuing to do now through the pandemic is identifying free educational and social services resources that are needed by the various different families. We're looking at making sure they have information about neighborhood food banks and pantries and soup kitchens, helplines, crisis lines. The 211 line is available in all 50 states, maybe not in all areas of a state, but that's one resource that people could definitely take advantage of. They have lots of different kinds of services that they support through that organization. Some definitely need financial resources and services. Some don't even know how to apply for unemployment, and giving them that kind of information is important. Learning about benefits and what's happening with those and planning around benefits is going to be really important for these families. And it's really great to see where you get a community coming together and identifying all these resources so families can have access to it. The other thing we found in Promise was the importance of community partnerships and how educators and post-secondary educators, service providers, Department of Rehabilitation, the Regional Center, all of those organizations were getting together, and we still do because of Promise. We support each other by sharing resources. And the nice thing about it is through this pandemic, we're sharing resources up and down the state, which has proven to be beneficial for all of us. Next slide. All right, so these are some of the things that we're definitely using. Of course, email. And I think one of the things we're finding is keeping it simple, not getting too wordy with the emails that we send. Some of our families are really great with using social media methods, and so that's been beneficial. Definitely using Instagram and Facebook. Using paper packet pickups at our grab-and-go school district lunch stations. And, of course, they're keeping social distancing requirements in mind, but a lot of people have found it beneficial by being able to pick up information from their teachers, the educators, people that are passing out the information at these grab-and-go stations. Other people do paper packet pickup at prime community locations. And the issue with some people there is transportation, and some people don't have the means to get to a place to pick these up. So sometimes there's even a little bit of home delivery going on. The mail and postcards are really critical. We didn't realize how important it was to get information out to families who did not have access to computers. So in our Promise program, we did send a lot of mailers out, postcards, things where people could get continuous feedback from those of us that are working on the projects. Also, if the families can have access to websites, we want to get them on there, show them which websites that are beneficial, maybe guide them through using the website so they know where to find some of these pieces of information that they need. And then some of our communities are even lucky enough to have public broadcast or cable TV stations where you can provide information to families. Next slide. All right, so our distance learning supports, a lot of our teachers are using Zoom, Google Classroom, Google Meets, Canvas, Microsoft Teams, and then of course YouTube videos. And this is all well and good for some of our educators, but some of us have had to learn how to use some of these tools. It hasn't been self-evident, so that's been a little bit of time in terms of startup. But we're also finding that the parents need help in learning how to use some of these tools. And so providing coaching for those families so that they can take advantage of some of these things. I know in some of our economically challenged neighborhoods, they are providing Chromebooks, and it's not always easy for people who haven't been used to using these kinds of technologies to get on there and use them. So coaching for parents has been really important. Making sure that the students know how to use these online tools. So even students in our most economically advantaged communities, some of the students really didn't know how to use some of these tools. So getting the parents up to speed has been really important. We're continuing to work on that. And then continuing to plan on IEP goals and objectives and making sure we're meeting the targets that are identified in the IEP. We've also used instructional assistants to provide individual and small group instruction, especially for students with complex needs. And that's proven to be very beneficial. What we're finding is that our students really like seeing the faces of the educational staff that they're so used to seeing on a daily basis, and kind of doing a schedule for them to operate on through the rest of the day, and that's working out really well. Families are really appreciating that. Keep in mind, we've had some families who say, look, I don't have time for this. We have some families who are essential workers who aren't even in the home to support their students. So we've got a plan for each thing, and that's the importance of looking at each individual family and trying to figure out what we can do to support them. And the translation and literacy needs need to be in the forefront of what we're working on, and we're continuing to do that. This is no easy process, but it's a process that we can all get better at when we continue to work on it and we share ideas across schools, communities, and throughout the state. Next slide. All right, these are the best support strategies that we've found so far. Plan and deliver individualized educational services, and make sure families know how to get to free internet services that are out there. Provide consistent check-in with our families. Arrange teachers, school counselor, DIS, parent call-in virtual appointments. And that's been particularly important for those who have access to computers. And whenever you work with your Department of Rehabilitation partners and some of the other community partners, it's great whenever those things can be coordinated. Make sure we're providing information on an individualized basis to families in terms of the resources that they need and the benefits, the information that would be beneficial to them. Continue with technical assistance on accessing these services, and then sharing the resources and creative ideas among educators and service providers. And that's probably the best thing that we continue to see happen in our communities, is how well we're all working together to make sure our families get the kind of supports they need. And we definitely need to continue planning for post-COVID-19, catch-up learning opportunities, summer 2020 and school year 2021. Some of us are hearing that the school campuses will be closed through summer for sure, and others are not sure yet, but having different kinds of planning options available for students and letting the families know about them as soon as you know is going to be really important. There's a couple of, next slide, a couple of resources we wanted you guys to have. This is the first one. It's actually put out by the National Disability Institute, and it's about financial health and resiliency for families. Really important information on financial health, community resources, benefits planning, staying connected with the virtual world, and there's a lot of website information in there that families and school district staff and community service providers can benefit with. Okay, next slide. And this is information from the ARC. The ARC is a national group that has been around for a long time, but they've got some really great plain language materials that we can utilize to help our youth and families understand information about COVID. And there's some technical pieces in here that are made easy using pictures and simple wording. And so make sure you look at these kind of resources out there to provide to families. And like I said, sometimes it will be internet-based, and other times you've got to figure out other ways to get this information out. That's why a newsletter is pretty important, so people can get that information easily, and you're not having to do so much individualized work. The newsletter lets you get to a lot of people at one time. All right, next slide. All right, there's information. This is benefits planning information, which is so important. If any of you have really worked with benefits planning, you'll know that it's not quite as easy as people might think. It's pretty difficult in keeping track of what's going on. And Dr. McFarland at San Diego State University keeps us informed on what's happening with the 2020 CARES Act and the fact that recipients of SSI, Supplemental Security Income, are eligible for stimulus rebate checks. And initially they said that all of the people would have to file a tax return. That's not required any longer. And so it's going to be really important for all of us to keep up to date on what is happening with the CARES Act and how it will affect people economically. Next slide. All right, so this is more information about the SSI checks. It gives you the U.S. code numbers, the IRS tax codes and things like that. And we want to make sure that families know that if their children, adults get these checks, that it's not going to affect the fact that they receive benefits. And so Cornell University's Yang and Tan Institute on Employment and Disability, they're putting out information sheets on benefits planning ever so often, and Michael got the latest one. I think it was put out yesterday, and just updating information on benefits planning and how the stimulus checks will affect benefits planning and their actual income and things like that. And I know parents worry about losing their benefits and want to make sure that they feel comfortable with what's going on with the stimulus checks. Next slide. Okay, almost. All right, I think this is my last slide, and I put together a strategy.
Hold on, let me see if I can get it bigger for you. I'm not sure why it's so funky. The other thing too, while I'm doing that, we've had a number of folks ask about, families that don't have internet access. And do you have any suggestions? And I know you work in California, it's such a large state, if you have any suggestions.
Yes, and we talked a little bit about that. We definitely used mail. We used drop-off, grab-and-go lunch spots to hand out written material. We used the phone a lot. So even our families who are low income were getting the free phones. And so we were able to send them text messages, calling them all the time. And they really liked, some of them like to have a predetermined phone time when they can expect you to call. Others don't mind you call whenever you want to. And it's basically, again, like I said before, is working with each individual family to make sure you know what their circumstances are, what they need, and how they can access it. Because if they can't drive to the grab-and-go station where the lunch is being provided, or they can't go to a certain community location, you've got to figure out how can you get the information that you need to get to the families. The newsletters that you can create with resource listings on it can be printed or they can be sent electronically. So a lot of different ways to make sure families are engaged and they get the information that they need. What you see here on the screen is a strategies and resources in distance learning for individuals with disabilities with significant needs. And it's just some of the items that I pulled off the weekly resource list that we're doing here in California. And so people up and down California send me resources that they want to share with other people. And we're trying to get that information out as quickly as we can. So we're doing one each week. We send it out, and a lot of people have gotten into kind of the willingness to share their resources. And I think when we found in Cal Promise is people are a little reluctant to do that in the beginning, but once you get into the hang of it, people are like, oh yeah, I think people would really benefit from this resource. So I've provided one type of list for you guys to look at, and you got to find out what works best in your community and for your each individual family. Thank you, Michael.
Sure. And just as a reminder, the resource about benefits planning from Cornell, you do have that as one of the handouts, as well as this resource that Linda put together. And it is multi-paged. There's a lot of resources here. And just kind of, as she was saying, go through them, and like the considerations that we had said at the beginning of today's webinar, considering your location and the students that you work in with, what does make the most sense. So with that, let me try to get out of here. Hold on one second. And
thank you for sharing.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter, hopefully. Just give me one second. Okay, maybe not. Sorry, folks. Just give me a minute. Okay. So next up, and before our next presenter, just a couple reminders. The PowerPoint for today can be found at transitionta.org, which is the NTACT website. If you do have any questions, unfortunately, given the large number, we have over 2,000 folks on the Zoom session, as well as a number of folks on YouTube streaming live. So we can't, if you raise your hand, we really can't answer that question. But if you do have questions, please type those into the Q&A feature. If it is a content question, or if you have any resource suggestions. Otherwise, if you're having any technical difficulty, if you could put that into the chat feature, we would appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Leslie Corey. And Leslie Corey works in the Western Pennsylvania area at an approved private school called the Watson Institute that has multiple facilities. And Leslie coordinates their secondary transition programming. And with that, Leslie, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Hopefully everybody can hear me, and I apologize, my dog is having a meltdown in the background. But we, as Michael said, the Watson Institute, we're an approved private school, so our situation's a little bit different, is that we have students coming from 7 different counties, 3 different states who cross over into Western Pennsylvania, and 72 different school districts, I believe, is what we serve. So we going virtual, and trying to get information out to a vast distance of learning was a little bit of a challenge at first. And some things that I want to say that as a team we really worked hard on right away was, we want people, don't feel you can do everything. We recognize that, not only are our school personnel struggling with all of this, and their, and our families and our students, but it's a trickling effect with the community. It's a trickling effect in our area. Pennsylvania has been, our schools have closed since March 13th, so we're 1 month in, and now we're going to be closed till the end of the school year. So with that, we're not really sure. So, some key points that we really strived right from the beginning as a school that's servicing about 500 students, we want people to remember, you can't do everything, and you need to prioritize what you're getting out there. But the key thing here that we really recognize, especially with our complex students, is reaching out to them and our families and helping them to establish a new normal. And that's the term I keep hearing a lot nowadays, is checking in regularly will go a long way. I think the first couple weeks we struggled to know what to do. We knew that some teachers were getting out, some therapists were getting out, and dealing with complex kids, they have a whole team of people at school. So it was who should talk to them, who should be the point of contact, and that took some working out. But as we've gone into since the beginning of April, we've learned, we've kind of set up a system with working as a team and going back to our team approach, talking with the families and asking them what they need most. I think that's a key point with working with complex needs kids, is no matter whether it's cognitive, behavioral, medical, physical, and any age, is asking the families and the students, what do they need most from us right now? And finding out what their resources are. As mentioned in the previous slides, you know, we take for granted what we have access in our buildings, and the resources we have. And we need to remember that not every family has computer access or internet access or a printer to make copies of things. And so we part of our process was finding out what do they have first, and then working individually with each student to figure out what we could do to set up a schedule for them. The other part was touching base with outside supports. If they have a supports coordinator that's helping them to go get supports in the home, if they have a voc rehab counselor that they're working with, if they have started, our graduates, if they have started to go into planning for their post-school activities, have we reached out to them? We found out many of those closed for a lot of our students as well. And so we needed to try to keep communication to find out where they would be with their process for going when this is all done. Next slide, Michael. As I was saying, the way we are delivering information, you know, like I had said, we service about 500 students. So we feel, you know, and every student is coming from everywhere. So our teachers and our therapists have been our primary contact with the families to set things going in place and set up meetings, instruction, reviewing goals, lessons plans. And then our social workers and our transition coordinators and our specials teachers are getting involved, and so that they are touching base as well with to work on activities at home and seeing what their needs are going to be. The key thing that we're working on was helping them to set up a daily, weekly schedule for them, finding out what was going to be meaningful to get through their week. We know that some of these students don't have many resources, as well as their families may be tending to their own jobs, they're tending to their other children. So it's how to make that work for their home life and work into a schedule that works for them. And so we went through all of the IEPs, reviewed their goals, reviewed their transition plans for our older students, and we developed weekly schedules with our families to figure out what worked for them. And that has gone through our teachers. We've brainstormed with our families about what materials they have on hand. We know that a lot of our complex kids do well with hands-on materials. They're working on pre-vocational skills, functional daily living activities, and I have a slide that I'll bring up some of those activities next. But we've done a lot of that communication with them to figure out how to incorporate what they already have. And then our sharing resources, providing what we have, and a lot of schools have this, is we have our main Watson page, and we have a link on there for some things that we have set up, and it says COVID-19 resources for parents to have just extra materials to be working with their students to keep them busy and different things. But we have teachers pages where individually we have set up where the lessons are with the goals, and then we have incorporated utilizing videos with either live group or one-to-one chats, and those are scheduled times that have worked with the family. We have teachers who have done recorded videos on the lessons, and we're recognizing that we want to keep these short, and how do we get them to be able to do them regularly so that they're meaningful. We've also mailed out a lot of hard copies to families. We've made materials. We had a couple weeks, to be honest, that we could not get into our own buildings, and so even our own staff couldn't make materials. When we left on that Friday, we weren't really sure that we were going to be coming back. So a lot of people have had to get into the building at separate times and make copies and scan things. And it's taught us a lot of lessons about things that we need to get on our system so that we can get all these things out there for parents. And it's been a learning process for a lot of staff, me included. I'm not a tech person, so I've had to learn a lot about how to get resources onto our system so that we can email them or do other venues with Zoom and some of the other video conferencing. We've also opened up some of our subscriptions. There's a lot of agents or organizations and websites now that are offering free resources because of the COVID-19. They are granting longer free trials out there. And I believe there was a great link on the previous with Linda that she had on there about resources. And I have a link onto our page at the end here about that. But we've had some of ours that we have true access to where we've granted access from remote access for our students and our families. Next page. Some of the activities like the transition, that's where I work with our teams a lot. And it's amazing that when Michael was talking about early on with age appropriate and relevant activities, there's a lot that people are saying, there's a lot we can do at home. Life skills, every kid needs life skills. And so cooking, household chores, money skills. I know I had my kids roll coins, something that I didn't get around to. Developing your grocery list, laundry, taking inventory of household supplies. That could be something really cool for students right now, especially since we're at home and we're resourcing what we have in the house. Working on the importance of good hygiene. Job readiness curriculum. We have made copies and sent out to a lot of our families. We use the News to You unique learning system, their transition passport curriculum. I apologize for the typo there. And Michael, you have a slide to show that?
Yeah, we actually have a copy of that resource, and that is copyrighted, but you had kind of made a copy for folks. Yeah. So when we get to the resources that are handouts, I'll pull that up.
Okay. It's a very universal, simplistic type of curriculum that really addresses some of the things that you ask students in job readiness with. Do they know their personal information? It explores some of the things that they know about their places and their interests and their preferences. But it's done in a non, I want to say it's more of an age appropriate venue that they have. We've given a lot of links to YouTube videos with suggestions for possibilities. YouTube, you can find just about anything if you Google onto there with applying and interviewing for jobs, asking for accommodations, researching jobs. These may be activities or goals for some students. contacting your local VR office counselor to see what they are doing remotely through pre-employment transition services. I just spoke with one of our schools this morning, and they're out of the Pittsburgh office. Their early reach coordinator is going to be doing a virtual job readiness class. And so that varies from state to state. I understand that, but if that is part of their pre-employment services, that may be something they're starting to do that you can offer up to your students. Transition assessments. Now is a good time to be having a lot of conversations with your families about what students want to be doing, and you can send some of that information. I've shared with, as a resources, a couple of the assessments that we use that Mike will go over at the end. Your student and parent transition surveys, sending those out, mailing those out to your families or emailing them out. You don't want to stress them out with anything, but it's a time that they might be able to have some conversations about that now that their students are home, and we don't want our students sitting on the couch when they're done with school. So it's a great time to have some of those conversations. Social skills, practicing about with the social distancing, with various media to keep in contact with family and friends. I know that a lot of our students at our education center their families would love for them to be texting or calling, and now's a great time to be working on some of that. And we have attached, one of the resources that I gave Michael is kind of a script and ways that you can start that conversation and provide that to families to use. Next time. And then kind of really the part with transition that, I work with my teams a lot on is, you don't get a lot of time to have extra transition meetings during the school year. And even though this really is a scary time, for some families, when you're talking with them, this is a really opportune time to have some in-depth person-centered planning with your students and with other people. And you can set up a Zoom meeting, you can have just a casual conversation, and please document what you're gathering from your families. But talking about, what a meaningful day will look like. Our families, I think, have gotten a really good taste for what life could look like if their students were home every day right now. And so, talking about if work and continued learning and what's going to make their life fun and what healthy living things. I think a lot of families, I know in our school, our students get a lot of therapeutic supports while they're in school with OT and PT and speech, to having conversations with what supports are going to be needed when a student leaves school. For families who are home now with their student all the time, who may have significant behavioral or medical or physical needs, and how are they going to be able to do that in their home setting long term? This is where listening to them and talking with them and keeping track of what they're saying is really important, so that's can be built into their transition planning. And then bringing up and talking about agencies. I know several post-school organizations that they may not be having their doors open right now, but they are definitely willing to talk to people and give them information about what their services could offer. So next slide. And just some resources that we have available on our Watson website. And if you just go to the watsoninstitute.org, you can access some of that. And I see Michael.
I'm not sure if we're going to be able to, and I don't want to
okay.
take time.
That's
but they
okay.
are, you do have Yes, we are. Okay, so real quickly, just wanted to share with you some of the resources that Leslie had found. So here is a pictorial interest inventory, and you all have these as copies. It really is a nice assessment, and it has real-life pictures, which is really cool. And then Leslie had mentioned this resource, if you just want to talk quickly about that.
This is the transition passport. This is for the unique learning system for News to You. We use this as an intro to job readiness for our students. It's very simplistic, but it goes over a lot of things that students need to know when they're going to be leaving to go into the workforce. Personal information, their Social Security, and as you go through the whole thing, and I know it'll be available on there, there's some age-appropriate visuals on there, so some of it is visual, and so that it makes it easier to sit down and go over with students, and it's something that parents would not struggle too much with, being able to do some of that.
And then 3 of the other resources that you have, Leslie had mentioned this. This was on a guide for communication, which is really nice. There is another worksheet that you have that's really looking in.
Those are some cheat sheets on chores around the home for students who may need more visual and how to build them into a schedule. And so you can adapt that around what you might need to work with a student at home to work on the steps of a task.
And then the last thing that you have is from the PICS company, it's kind of a guide, a directional guide. I did want to mention with both the passport as well as PICS, these are copyrighted materials, so know that they are things that one would need to purchase.
Yeah. Yep.
So with that, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate it. Great resources. And thank you so much. And I'd like to now turn this over to Allison DeYoung from the YES Center, the Youth Employment Solutions Center. So Allison, you're on.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Allie DeYoung. I am the project director with the Youth Employment Solutions Center. We are a partnership between TASH and Transcend. We support with technical assistance to the partnerships and employment state projects. So it's really an honor to be on here today. I hope everybody's hanging in there. And I hope, I'm going to share what I hope to be helpful resources to support you, your team, and students during this unusual time and hopefully beyond. So as you can see on the slide, I'm first going to talk about a few tools and resources that can help support career exploration and discovery, as well as a visual representation of student skills. So the Charting the Life Course framework, I'm sure a lot of you may be familiar with. This framework is a great starting point and can be used as a tool to kind of come back to regularly. So you can start this and then often go back to reevaluate. These tools were developed by UMKC and are available for a free download at the website there on the slide, lifecoursetools.com. And everyone is encouraged to use the tools and modify them in a way that you see fit. So they're very, you can customize them to meet the needs of whoever you're supporting. So these aren't just for students with disabilities. This is what it was built for, but it can be used for elderly people and kind of anyone that's looking to kind of reevaluate and look at what a good life is. So on the next slide, I just broke down one of the sheets. That's the trajectory worksheet. And this is one tool that's part of the framework, but it's a great way to map out what a good life can look like. So it helps break down the different parts of what makes a good life and what it includes and what it does not include. So using the space around the arrow, you can think about what is currently happening in the student's life that's helping them get towards the ideal goal of whether that's living on their own or being employed and getting into a career. And then it helps kind of evaluate what needs to happen in order to head in that direction of a good life. So on the next slide, if the students that you're working with or your child doesn't currently have a website or digital portfolio, this is a great opportunity to start one. So I know a couple of the presenters prior to have talked a lot about the technology barriers, and this definitely could be a barrier, but I think, there's tons of resources to reach out for support in terms of building these. Digital portfolios are very dynamic. It's a professional tool for students, especially with students with complex support needs, to share about their life. It paints them in a positive and using technology skills, and it's an easy thing to share. So that you can include pictures, their interests, work experiences. When I help students create these, we had a blog, and this was a great spot to document the work experiences that they've had either in school or in transition at post-secondary education programs. And it can also be used as a resume. And videos, I love them, a huge fan of videos, and they're super powerful, and it can really be used. They don't have to be fancy. You can use any type of mobile device to sort of shoot a quick video of your student or child doing employment related activities or just something that they enjoy. So if it's harder for them to articulate what their interests are or their skills, these are it's a great tool to use. So I think, let me see here. And back to Makenzie mentioned at the beginning, supported decision making. So in the past, I was able to work with a student who built their website portfolio, and at the time was not his own guard. He had a guardian, so he was not his own guardian. And through building this website, he was able to send the link to his website directly to the lawyer who was kind of doing the investigation of reinstating his rights. And it was kind of no questions asked, because he was able to display what he was capable of doing, work experience he had, and some of those life goals. So they can really hold a lot of power. So on the next slide, this is a very similar, just a different way to do something visual, but this is an example of a vision statement. So Kentucky Works, which is one of our friends and partners in the Partnerships and Employment States, they share this tool out statewide and with their pilot sites. This is definitely an ideal activity to do during this time while we're all locked down and not able to leave our homes. Again, this is very similar to the other tools I've mentioned, just a different type of format. So it's not quite as involved as creating a website, but the purpose of this is to show the student in a positive light, to truly focus on their skills, strengths, and career goals. So kind of the three main takeaways from the vision statement is it helps tell the student their own story in a very visual way. So as you can see, there's pictures, very easy to read information. It helps people around the student, mainly the family, see them in a different light. And it's focused very much on strength-based. So it really can help change the narrative for a student that might not be in the most positive environment or around the most supportive people, really see the student in a different light. And if it's created, if it's done correctly, this can really act as a resume for a student. So they could take this into an interview, or if they're doing an interview over Zoom, they can pull this up and screen share, and it kind of helps jog their memory of different things that they have done and their list of their strengths. So if you use, there's the link on that page, which will also be included in the resources, and you can find the exact template to use this. And I know I don't want to sound repetitive, but quite a few people have mentioned just focusing on daily life skills during this time. So it's a great time to do that because it's in the most natural environment, which is at home. I know, fortunately, there are a handful of self-contained classrooms that do a lot of this in the classroom setting, and it's not always, it's more difficult, especially for students with complex support needs, to transfer these skills and generalize them. So doing that at home is a great way to learn that and really practice them on a daily basis, especially during this time. So, what are ways that the students can get involved and also help gain employment skills? So, if you're grocery shopping online or doing Amazon Prime and those sort of things, engage the students in doing the grocery shopping that way. And just something to remember, especially with kind of listing these suggestions out, to make sure to share individualized suggestions with families. So if you have a student who with a physical disability or needs mobility supports, to really keep that in mind and not just give a general, make the bed every morning, but really break down the task analysis of what that would look like for each specific student. And then building and maintaining skills for employment. A lot of the tasks that we do at home can be applied to a work environment. For example, so Kyle's website, I showed a picture of that a couple slides ago. He works at a wellness and fitness center, and he helps hand out the towels to the members as they come in and kind of throughout the center. And that's one of the jobs that he does. So Kyle wears bandanas every day, and at home, his mom and supports have been able, have really engaged him more in the process of folding the bandanas, taking his, he's driving his chair into his room and then using those same motor skills to put the bandanas back into his drawer, which is a skill that he's doing at work. So we don't want to regress during this time, especially if it's a skill that a student's been working on for a long time, to just stop for 1 to 2 months. So we make sure that we're still practicing those. And then setting a routine. Oh, sorry, back one more. I saw a meme recently. Those have really been helping me. Sorry, back up a couple more. Michael, sorry. Thanks. But I was saying I saw a meme recently that there's no longer days of the week. We're just focusing on yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So for all of us, it's just important that we get into some sort of routine and schedule. And we can support students by doing that through visual schedules. And a couple of the previous presenters have already shared some resources to do that. I'm a huge Google fan. So if you're supporting students with accessing technology, this is a great time to kind of plug them into some of those digital and apps. And then gaining skills around personal responsibility. So what's going on at home that the student can be taking responsibility for in order to learn skills to hopefully live on their own or with a roommate or a significant other after they transition out of high school. And then just a few additional ideas. As I'd already mentioned, expanding on students' technology skills. So on the next slide, this can include setting up a professional Gmail account. So if we've got Sparkle Girl 35 at Gmail, we can set up a more professional Gmail account for students so that they can include, that on their resumes and different things like that. They can set up a LinkedIn profile, start a blog, and then getting familiar with meeting platforms such as Zoom and WebEx and certain platforms like that, because that's what everyone's doing. So including those students with more complex support needs, they can get on Zoom calls with, hopefully with the support at home. And, again, I know that everyone's situation is very different. So if parents are both essential workers and they're not in the home environment, sometimes that might not be an option, but just something to consider. And then a very similar idea to the ideas I've shared, starting a positive personal profile, kind of whatever that looks like. It's just a tool for the student to use. So this is a great time to spend some time walking through some of those different outlines and templates. And that's also going to be available on the website from this. And then thinking about how we can bring in partners creatively. So how can the VR counselors be supported to do virtual pre-employment services? Can a team meeting be held via Zoom to get some of those things set up so that we're not losing so much momentum during this time, and that especially for those students that are graduating at the end of the year, what sort of agencies do they need to be connected with? So just last few things to remember, really focusing on the outcome. So when we're all done and we're allowed to go out and eat in restaurants and go back to work, it's important for students that are graduating to really be, especially for those graduating, to be leaving with the tools and skills to continue on their employment and career journeys. So do they have an portfolio that they're using and an updated professional resume, just to make sure that they're kind of checked those boxes, especially that we can do all that we can, in these last couple months remotely, since we won't be in school. And then, there was a whole section on family support, but families will need support doing all of these sort of things. We've heard that, I've heard from quite a few colleagues that one of the biggest barriers is supporting students remotely, supporting them remotely is getting the parents up to speed with the technology. So if we can support the parents, information should be delivered clear, individualized, and then if possible, weekly, if not daily. I know a couple people mentioned that they have phone calls and texting and kind of grab and go information. So however that's best delivered. And then as we're all, trying to think of new ways to engage in these uncharted waters. As Michael mentioned at the beginning, please remember that the activities and assignments are age appropriate. A good question we can ask ourselves is, what are other 14 to 16, 18 to 22-year-olds doing during this time? And sometimes that includes playing video games or sleeping a little late, but we can all get up and put on some, the more professional looking sweatpants and, go to our workspace and kind of follow our schedule. And just, it's not on here, but one thing I just wanted to say is just remember to be gentle with ourselves. Everyone is experiencing this time in a very different way. As everyone is moving to a virtual platform, this can be totally overwhelming. So I hope that the tools in this webinar are, you can take one little nugget to move forward and, implement this and, to connecting with your students. So thanks for letting me share with those. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And I think that's all I have. So thanks, Michael.
Great. Thanks, Allie. And next up, we have a section on health and secondary transition considerations and resources. So Samhita, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Can you see me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good.
We see you, you're there, and I think your slides are up, so I think we're good to go.
Awesome, thank you. So like Michael said, my name is Samhita Ilango, and I'll be talking about healthcare transition. So our national healthcare transition work is funded by the Federal Health Resources and Services Administration, and our local DC healthcare transition work is funded by DC Health. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So what is healthcare transition and why is it important? Well, healthcare transition is the planned process for transition preparation and transfer of care and integration into an adult model of healthcare. And really the goal of healthcare transition is to improve the ability of youth and young adults to manage their own health and effectively use healthcare services to their best abilities. So why is this important? Well, it's good to know that healthcare transition is important in many areas, including post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. And I always like to throw out that this idea that if you're not healthy, it's going to be difficult to work, it's going to be difficult to keep up with education, and you won't be able to live independently. And despite this importance, there's very little attention that's been directed at helping students learn about their own health needs and medicines, how best to manage their own health, using healthcare, and how to plan for that transfer to an adult healthcare. We could go to the next slide. Our organization partnered with DC's Community of Practice on Secondary Transition to create 2 tools. The first tool, and also both tools were created with input from educators and city officials and families. And so that first tool here, both of which are participant handouts, is a healthcare transition readiness assessment that's geared towards students who have an IEP. And the goal of the assessment is to help reveal students' knowledge about their health and using healthcare in areas that they need to learn more about. The second tool is actually a companion piece for the readiness assessment. And it's a healthcare transition sample goals cheat sheet. And you can see later on when you actually see it that this cheat sheet is meant for special educators or members of the IEP team to use when trying to develop transition plan goals related to healthcare transition. So if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see the readiness assessment. You can download this actual document, but you'll see that is categorized with 4 main categories. The first is related to personal care and use of communication supports. The next one is on transition importance and confidence. The next is a section on my health. And this my health section, it reads a statement, and then you have 3 options of marking the statement. So either yes, I want to learn, or no. And then similarly, the last section is called My Medicines, and you once again have statements, and the user is to mark yes, I want to learn, or no. And this readiness assessment is intended for students to complete, or they can complete it alongside their families and caregivers. And yeah, so we also have this resource available in Spanish on our website, which we do have linked in the later slides. But if we go to the next slide, you will actually see this is the sample goals cheat sheet that I was talking about. This is the first page, and you'll see that this first page is related directly to the My Health section of that readiness assessment. So on the left side, you have a list of different items related to My Health from that readiness assessment. And on the corresponding right side, you'll see a sample goal that's been drafted. And this sample goal follows the IEP transition plan format, and we've left little blanks there. And if you go to the next slide, you'll actually see that this is the second page of that sample goals sheet, and it directly relates to the My Medicine section of the readiness assessment. So once again, you have the readiness assessment item on the left, and on the right side, you'll have the sample goal that's to be filled out. And now we're going to actually walk through an example of setting a goal utilizing both these tools. So here we have the transition readiness assessment, and Michael, one more slide. Thank you. And we here have the My Health section completed. You'll see that the student has filled out yes for all of these items, but we have a no under the item that reads, I know or I can find my doctor's phone number. So since that is a goal that we want to work on, you'll see on the next slide that we have the cheat sheet here. And if you look on the left side, circled in red, you'll see that exact goal written out, and then the sample goal that relates to it, which reads, by the end of the IEP cycle, student will name and identify their doctor in their phone when asked with blank % accuracy. And obviously these can be modified as needed. And if you go to the next slide, I have compiled a couple ideas here to help achieve this goal. So if this was in the IEP transition plan and was listed as something to work on, there are a few things that the IEP team or a family member or the special educator can do with the youth to achieve this goal. The first is to help them add their doctor's name and phone number into their cell phone contacts. Young people these days are more and more handy with their cell phones, so this would be a good, quick, easy way to access it. The second example here we have is to use Got Transition's medical ID resource. This resource is fantastic. It lists out simple steps to add health, medical information, and emergency contact information into your smartphone. And the best thing about the medical ID and why it's so useful is that it's accessible outside of the lock screen. So let's say something has happened and an emergency medical service member is attending to you. They can take your phone, and without needing to know how to unlock your phone, this information, which you can customize, is available to them. So if you have an allergy, if you're taking medications, if you have a certain condition, it's listed there. And this handout we do have steps so that you can add this for your iPhone, and you can also add this for an Android phone. And this isn't just useful for youth and young adults too. This is good for anyone listening on this webinar. It's a great tool to have on your phone. And finally, for a youth who's trying to achieve this goal, practicing this skill is extremely helpful. Asking them, hey, can you pull up your doctor's phone number? And making sure that they know how to do it, other than just doing it once with them, having them do it on their own. And on the next goal, or on the next slide, like everyone's mentioned on this webinar, we all have a lot of time at home now, and these resources that we've compiled on this slide is a good set of items that can be done in partnership with your youth, or they can do independently. The first is a transition timeline, which lists out age-specific milestones related to healthcare transition. The second is the general version of the readiness assessment that we have that we showed in a previous slide. We also have a version for parents and caregivers. And a fun activity to do is actually to have the parents and caregivers fill out one, have the youth fill out the other, and actually afterward compare the results and kind of see if everyone was on the same page. It'll be surprising for both parties to kind of learn if they aligned answers or not. And the next resource here is a goal-setting one-pager that was developed by Children's Mercy Kansas City, and it can help you set up your health goals. The fourth item here is that medical ID resource, and our last item here is an online quiz that Got Transition created, and it's a quiz geared toward youth and young adults, kind of modeled after a BuzzFeed quiz. So it's fun, it's engaging, and it's very short. And at the end of the quiz, it tells you how ready you are to transition to adult care. And if you want to see all these resources and download the actual resource sheet, you can click that green box listed below for a composite list of them. And finally, if you want any more resources or resources in Spanish or for other populations, you can visit us at gottransition.org. And that's it for today.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samhita. Great information and wonderful resources. Really appreciate it. So as we wrap up today, I did want to mention there are a number of disability-specific resources that have recently been posted and put together based on disability categories. They're here. They're listed in your PowerPoint under autism, including one from Minnesota, which is a low incidence project for students now that the COVID-19 crisis is going on, and the Autism Society of Florida. That is another really good resource. For mental health, kids with behavioral health needs, two of the resources, one is NAMI that we're listing. The other is from the state of Iowa and their mental health practices due to COVID-19 and resources. And the site itself is called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. I did want to mention too the number of resources that folks have left either in the Q&A or the chat. We will be collecting all that information. We'll go through it and it will be posted to the NTACT website. Once that is done, we'll have a handout for today's webinar. The other set of resources for individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, and I did want to mention and point out in particular, this is, if you hit this link, this distance learning for special education resources is being compiled as a crowdsourcing event with the University of Kansas. And there really are a number of excellent resources for students K through 12th grade, but there's hyperlinks. It's really easy to navigate through. So would really, if you have not checked that out, I definitely would. And then we have a number of resources for sensory impairments, including information for students that are visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing. So as we mentioned at the very beginning of today's session, we would like you all to go to the Transition Coalition website in the Ask the Expert section to continue today's conversation. We know there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of interest, and if you go to that site, it's a place where you can ask questions, you can discuss resources, and that will be up for the next several weeks. So it really is a nice place to continue the discussion from today's webinar. As a reminder, today's PowerPoint and resources can be found under the Transition TA website, the NTACT website. We are recording today's webinar. It will be available by April 20th, and a captioned recording will be available by April 24th. We are offering CRC credits for today. You will be receiving an evaluation in the mail tomorrow. If you asking everyone to complete the evaluation, including letting us know of other topics and other topics specific to students with complex support needs that you'd be interested in finding out about. If you are interested in CRC credits, you will be taken, there's a yes/no question if you want CRC credits, and it'll take you to another link, and you will be able to have those credits awarded through George Washington University and NTACT. Every participant will receive a certificate of attendance if you're participating in this live broadcast. As a reminder, both NTACT and NTACT have sites devoted to COVID-19. Both those sites continue to be updated, so please check back. Additional resources continue to be added, including the resources that are being discussed today, as well as all the information that has been shared and resources from the participants in the Q&A and chat. We have a couple of events that are coming up this week and next week. This week, NTACT and Cornell University in collaboration are presenting a webinar on benefits, public benefits, and the CARES Act. That is this Thursday, April 15th. I'm sorry, that's this Thursday. That should be this Wednesday. It's a typo. Wednesday, it's tomorrow, April 15th. Then this Thursday, YTAC is presenting a webinar on locating, serving, and supporting youth with disabilities involved in the juvenile justice system, and the link is there. And then next week, we will, again, NTACT and NTACT are sponsoring our next webinar in this series, and next week's webinar is entitled Snapchat, TikTok, and Beyond. And its focus is really how to engage young folks, so folks that are teenagers and young adults, in connecting, collaborating, and learning. So that webinar is next Tuesday at 12 Eastern. As I mentioned, you will receive an email tomorrow with this link. It's our evaluation link. We do ask that everyone who's participated, if you could take a few minutes and complete that. It will only take you about 5 minutes. If you are looking for CRC credits, you'll need to complete that and go into the link to request CRC credits. And again, everyone will receive an evaluation for today. I want to thank you all for joining us. This was really a good collaborative webinar. The conversation was great that we had. I wanted to thank our presenters again, Melissa Allison from Able, South Carolina, Linda O'Neill from San Diego State University, Leslie Corey from the Watson Institute, Adley DeYoung from Youth Employment Solutions, and Samhita Ilango from Got Transition and the National Alliance for Advanced Adolescent Health for their information and support today. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. And just to wrap up, these are the websites for both NTACT and NTACT, and our contact us if you need to get in touch with us directly. And you can reach us also through social media. So thank you again all for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.